Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of The Lies of P. I played it on the Xbox Series X. It's also available on the Xbox One, PS4, PS5, and PC. And before we get into it, I want to point out my shirt. It was made for me by a friend of mine who also has their own little crafts company thing that they're doing. It's called Lovesick Designs, and I will include a link to it in the description below and maybe somewhere else if I can, but there will definitely be a link. Check them out. So, The Lies of P takes place in the, I'm gonna have to read this, Belle Epoque era? I'm probably saying that wrong. I don't speak French. But it takes place in that era in France, and it's obviously kind of an alternate version of that. You know, considering that there's robots and mechanoids and such. But those robots are known as puppets, and you play as a puppet named Pinocchio. If you couldn't guess, this game definitely takes its inspiration from, you know, Pinocchio. Or at least elements. But Geppetto had created the puppets, and then there was an event called the Puppet Frenzy, where, well, the puppets frenzied and killed all the humans they could. There are still groups of humans. Ones that fight the puppets and survive are called stalkers, but you, Pinocchio, are basically tasked with finding out what the hell happened and what's going on. And I gotta say, I liked the story. I think it was a bit sparse, but that's not really uncommon in this style of game. But I do think they do a better job than quite a few of the major Soulsbourne companies out there at giving you more story and in a coherent manner. But let's get into the audio, and the voiceover work is, it's there. I mean, it's far from the worst that I've ever heard, but pretty much everyone lacks any real personality. I mean, there are a few that have some personality, but their delivery is not necessarily the best, and a lot of the main people that you listen to, they're practically reading scripts. I mean, obviously they're reading scripts, but they're not really giving you anything more than a reading. When it comes to the music, though, I really do like the music. I think it fits very well with the time period that this takes place in, and it fits the general vibe of everything going on. Whenever there's action, it's good music for that. When you're exploring, it's good music for that. And then the sound effects. I think the sound effects are actually really well done in this game for all the different mechanical enemies. I think they brought them to life just very well as all the stuff you're doing, whether it's your swords, your mechanical arm, things like that. I think they did just a good job. Onto the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this is a third-person action RPG that falls firmly in the Soulsbourne category. That being said, I would say this is an easier Soulsbourne. This is definitely much more of an entry-level Soulsbourne. They have certain things that can make it easier, although if you want the bosses to be more challenging, you can absolutely make them more challenging. You get these items that you can use before every battle, and it'll summon in a specter, and that specter you can use to your advantage in combat. They will actually damage the boss as well as draw aggro, so you can do more damage, and you can really focus on getting damage done rather than balancing focus and avoiding the enemy. And while that does make it easier, don't get me wrong, you can absolutely still get smoked if you're not careful, because if you start doing too much damage, then you're gonna get aggro and you can get wrecked. But it does help, and it helps lower the difficulty, which is great for anyone who wants a more entry-level game. I love Soulsbourne games, I've said it before, but I've also said that I'm not amazing at them, so I actually really enjoyed that element. But there are also mid-bosses that you can't use specters on. They are easier, but, you know, again, sometimes you gotta be prepared for them, and this game does a good job of tricking you at times, thinking you're going into a boss fight, and it's not, or vice versa. I think the combat is really well done. I think giving Pinocchio his arm that can fill a lot of roles, it can give you a lot of different attacks, or you can use it in a lot of different ways, I thought was cool. I really loved the puppet string, which is basically a grappling hook. You can pull enemies in, you can launch yourself at them. I also found his flamethrower arm very useful in a particular boss fight, and I used the shit out of it in that one. But this does operate a lot like you would expect it to. You kind of have your main goal, which is moving through the world. Enemies come at you, not in waves or hordes, sometimes up to 5 at a time, but it's generally not in an insane number. It's generally one-on-one, and like any good Soulsbourne, if you let your guard down, you can get smoked by basic enemies. But it is still an RPG, so the more enemies you beat, the more souls you get. They're not called souls, they're called ergo. And when you have that, you can level yourself up, you can level up your weapons, you can, you know, your arm, just things like that. General upgrades. I mean, it works like you would expect it to. You can imbue your weapons with certain abilities, you have grenades with certain effects, you get things called quartz, which allow you to upgrade the number of health items you use, the amount of damage you can do outside of leveling yourself up, just all sorts of things, all sorts of RPG elements to help enhance your character. But this game does do some cool things. It's really about guarding more than dodging, or at least I found it was, because you can do like perfect guards, which can break the enemy's weapon or prevent you from getting damage. But if you do a regular guard and you still take a bit of damage, you can attack the enemy to get your health back, or if you perform a perfect guard after having received some guarded damage, you'll get all of your health back. Another thing that makes it easier than other Soulsbornes is a major boss arena. You still get that kind of doorway that blocks you from going in immediately, but when you die, your souls spawn outside of there, so you don't have to go into the arena, try and get your souls, try to beat the boss. You can pick up your souls before going back into the arena. Again, I keep calling them souls, they're called ergo, but whatever, you get the point. Let's get on to the controls, and overall I think the controls are very good. I will say that there were times where I would be trying to sprint and my character would dodge instead. Like, I know I was holding down the B button to run, but he would roll. And there were definitely a couple of times where I tried to slash and he didn't. So there were some times where it didn't respond the way I needed it to. I'm gonna say that. But 99% of the time, they worked how I needed them to, and those situations really didn't lead me to dying in what I felt was an unfair way. Overall, I was pretty happy with the controls. There were just those few weird moments, which obviously you don't want them, but in my experience, they didn't get me killed. I could see how they could get someone killed, though. But then let's get into the graphics and visuals, and it's a good looking game. The one thing I did notice, which was a bit weird and felt kind of off, and it was specifically on Pinocchio, was the face, the hair had a good amount of detail, but when I started with him, he was wearing an open shirt and like his chest just lacked detail. Like, you go from like proper detail to like Ken doll chest. It was weird. And I do wish there was more detail in some of the other characters. I mean, there's a lot of like cool design details, but not those details that make them look more realistic. Not that they looked like complete garbage, but there could have been more, and there was more in Pinocchio's face than some of the other characters. Where they did put a lot of detail and a lot into the designs as well are the enemies and the world itself. All the different puppets look really cool, and you can see where they would fit in kind of in society. I mean, there could be a greater variety overall, but it also makes sense at the same time that there would be uniformity amongst them. Your butler ones are going to look very similar, your maid ones are all going to look alike kind of thing because of manufacturing limitations at the time. You could imagine that happening. But the way they move and like the bosses and just all the different elements that bring those to life and just make them look really cool, I was impressed by all of that. I think it was very well done. But then also the world. I think they put a lot of detail into the bricks, into just the buildings, the trees, all of that. You run into enemies that are wearing animal masks. We've seen them in the ads, and like the amount of detail in those and making each one individual. I think they just really put that effort in, and they brought them to life in a cool and creepy and kind of convincing way for the world that they're building. But then you also have the different animations for, you know, the regular enemies, for your character. I think all of that is very well done. And I like all the different special effects for your attacks, for their attacks, for the water. And admittedly, the rain coming down looked cool. There were some places where the rain, like, running off of things looked a little shitty and could have looked better. But again, small detail, and when you're really running around, you won't notice things like that. It's when you stop and see some of those smaller things. Just overall, I was really impressed by the world that they built. I think they did a good job with not only the design, but adding all the little details that help it feel more realistic and help suck you in. So to wrap this up, I actually really enjoyed this game. I'm happy to have picked it up. As an enjoyer of Soulsborne games, I had a lot of fun with it. If you're like hardcore, you can run through Dark Souls without getting hit once. This may not be the most satisfying experience for you, but if you're curious about dipping your toes into a Soulsborne and you just in general love Soulsborne gameplay, I definitely think this is worth picking up. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me what's your favorite version of Pinocchio? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.